So for today's agenda, just quickly go through what we're going to be talking about today, what we're seeing and what we're expecting coming up in a COVID and post-COVID ecosystem, what you can be doing now to support your remote teams, to increase productivity and collaboration, to set your teams and company up for greater success post this current pandemic, as well as post other events that may occur down the road. As well as security for remote teams. And then we're going to wrap up with some questions and answers. And I just got a note from a colleague of mine. It was interesting talking about the toilet paper hoarding. It was an interesting take by a journalist. I thought I'd share it to kick us off about things that we don't necessarily think about, unintended consequences or water falling. And it was that the toilet paper hoarding might not have been actually that. It might have been kicked off by the fact that there are two types of toilet paper. Toilet paper for commercial use used in office buildings and those purchased for in-home. They're different quality, as I'm sure everyone here knows. But the difference is people are used to using the restroom at work. And when everybody stopped using their offices, people's bathroom breaks occurred at their house. And so the supply chain wasn't prepared for that shift. So it's an interesting take about how something like COVID-19 affected something like the toilet paper. It looked like something, but might have been something else. So kicking off, what we're seeing universally. I think there's a paradigm shift that's occurring, not just in the technology space, but in many different areas. People are less willing to share equipment. I think we're seeing a move towards fewer open office environments, less shared objects in general, and even things like ATMs, which many of us are used to using that are out in public, that hundreds of people, if not thousands, touch every day, those buttons or those screens, people are now becoming disgusted by. Talking to a dental client of ours, they were talking about how they could make a touchless experience post-COVID-19 for their patients so that they could walk in the door without having to touch anything themselves, be seen, and walk out without having to touch any shared surfaces. Also, many companies were not prepared for work from home. You might see through the presentation WFH, that's work from home acronym. Things of topics such as continuity planning. What do we do if we can't access our office? What are the communication strategies that companies should be using? Things like how to communicate with each other internally, as well as work from home equipment and plans. Things like laptops or webcams, which interestingly enough, webcams almost exclusively throughout the entire US are sold out, something that people didn't plan on purchasing beforehand. As well as collaboration tools. And this doesn't apply to just small companies. Big companies were unprepared for the demand too. Microsoft saw over a 750% increase in demand. They actually had to put prioritization rules in place because they needed to make sure that infrastructure critical or healthcare critical applications were able to run as intended. Comcast, as of a couple weeks ago, saw demands increase over 200%. In foreign countries, especially in Europe, there were rules put in place with Netflix and Amazon to limit high definition content to standard definition because the networks were unable to handle that surge. But I will tell you who was prepared, the bad actors. And I'm sure David's going to touch base on that in the next half of the presentation. So what we're seeing with our clients, ditto for everything for the previous slide. A lot of people weren't prepared. But I will say that most clients were prepared for client communication to talk to their clients. Many companies sent out emails about how they were handling COVID-19. We ourselves even built a specific landing page on our website to talk and aggregate about all the communication sent out related to this crisis. They kept their clients and communities up to date. I will say some of the frontline staff a little bit less so. Remote access to documents were fairly strong, and being able to just jump in and access a document, at least at a very base level, existed, but maybe it wasn't as efficient as it could have been. We're still seeing sometimes companies having to email documents back and forth, leading to a document existing in multiple places in different portions of its life cycle. And I'll talk about that during some of the document collaboration. current workflow was shoehorned into work from home. And I like to talk a little bit now, post-COVID, or during and post, is work from anywhere. It really shouldn't even be work from home. I think work from home is already, that ship sailed. People have already been working from home. When designing and thinking about your business continuity plan, it should be anywhere. You should be able to work from the office, from the house, from an airplane, from a hotel room. The technology, and not even just the tech side, just the business planning should enable the employees to work efficiently from anywhere. I will say that the frontline staff are probably the worst hit by this. People that might be at the door greeting people who are walking in. Sometimes the business continuity plan completely left those people out, and they might be a little bit lost in space. There's also disengagement from common collaboration moments. I can tell you, I love walking into people's office and talking to them about something as opposed to just chatting. So that's where you start to see the evolution of video come in. I will say it's not a replacement for talking to people in person, but it's definitely a good stopgap. Another item is work from home plans were largely untested, and it showed. It's a new muscle for people to use, and it's something that people should be practicing time and time again. As well as focusing on business continuity, and David's going to talk about that. So what are some short-term steps or concerns that are going on right now? Maybe your staff are using this time as a staycation, as our friend here in the bathtub is enjoying his cocktail. How do you know, and how do your managers know that people, when they're working from home or working remotely, are being efficient? How do you know that they're executing on their day-to-day tasks? So not only is it a new muscle for the employees to work from home, but managing a remote workforce effectively comes with its own challenges. What will they do when the workload slows down? So that's another concern that even us internally have been discussing, is as this new work curve changes and evolves, how do you make sure that you're staying ahead of where the trends are headed? So I can say that for Ntiva, we saw over a 100% increase in demand overnight. That's not something that we could prepare our staff for. And so it was a challenge, and we appreciate all of our clients that worked with us through that challenge, and we came out of it pretty quickly. But now that the curve has finished, in many businesses, what do you do next? You see restaurants doing things like delivery, or even delivery of cocktails, all these new options coming about through creativity. So as your business continues to evolve, what are some things that you could be forward thinking about during this time before COVID rolls into its next phase? Example, again, the dental office that's thinking about, when I reopen, how can I make my office a safer place for patients? And then what are clients seeing and thinking about how we communicate? So how does our communication strategy show our level of preparedness? So if you as a provider to your customers are not prepared to handle the client communication or are not organized, how are the customers feeling during that time? And lastly, are other firms handling this better? So we're all in competitive landscapes. And so some companies are handling this work from home or shelter in place very well. Some are not. And the output of that is what the clients really feel. How are the levels of service being provided back during this time? How well are we able to collaborate? And ease of being able to do business is one of the things that customers are looking at constantly. As well as, how are we making money during this time? So that's something to be thinking about. If your primary strategies of cash generation are unavailable or dwindling, how can you use this time to think about re-architecting or reinventing your business? So shifting into some more immediate things you could be looking at in terms of technology as well is your VPN. VPN stands for Virtual Private Network, and many companies have different ways to gain access to their remote work resources. But a virtual private network is very common, and it's something you should test often. One thing that you can ask your IT firm is, how well is our remote connectivity being handled in terms of a utilization perspective? Are we always at 100% utilization in terms of how much available bandwidth is currently available to our system? So if you are experiencing slow speeds or connectivity issues, looking at your speed of the internet or your quality of internet at the office is something to consider. But also remember that it's a two-way street. You have your office internet, but you also have your home internet. And a lot of issues that are occurring right now are not necessarily related to your business grade internet. It's everybody working from home, which the providers are having to contend with. You might be on a shared internet connection, like a coax solution or cable solution from Comcast or Cox or WOW. Those can lose speed over time as more people start using that same pipe. Whereas some other connection types like DSL or fiber, even consumer fiber, are more dedicated. So you're going to get a better experience. Another notion to consider too is it's not just about the speed of your internet. If you have a 100 megabit connection or you have a 500 megabit connection or a 50 megabit connection, those are some speed examples. It's also the latency. So the example I use in that is, think about a highway. You could have a 6-lane highway that can move a lot of cars, but the speed limit might only be 55 miles an hour. So times at which that speed limit or that latency make a big difference are things like what we're talking about right now on a video call. So when I talk, the data needs to go from my computer out through the internet to Zoom back to your computer. And so the longer it takes for me to get my connection out to Zoom, there's more delay in what you see, as well as the quality of that. So other connection types like fiber optic have a faster, have a lower latency, better latency, and that allows for more real time. So when you're talking, especially two-way communication live, you might be talking over each other. That has to do with the latency of the connection. And last part about this is you can easily upgrade your remote internet. So even at your house or at your office, if you're experiencing issues, you can call your internet provider and ask them to increase your speed. Likely that will not increase the latency, sorry, reduce the latency. You want low latency, but that's something that they could do remote. So I'd like to talk about virtual meetings next. And it's, again, not a muscle that a lot of us have been flexing a lot, but almost everybody's being forced into 100% virtual meetings to some extent. So how do you stay present when you're working from home? So one area that you can look at is practice area groups. You can look at different segments of your business and have team huddles. So in our own business, we do morning coffees, we do some happy hours, we'll do some games. There's a lot of game platforms that are out there that are nicer than just a virtual happy hour. From our own experience, the virtual happy hours make sense, but in smaller groups, it's hard to collaborate well. But this also is a form of practice. So when you're doing virtual happy hours, or you're doing a virtual game with your staff, or you're doing a team huddle in the morning, you're practicing your remote connectivity. And I think that's what's important. Last thing to note is you really want to focus on video. If you're not using video, it's much less present, and the people in your meetings are going to be less present. So the more that you have the person looking at each other, they're not wandering the house, doing laundry, half paying attention, or multitasking. So in terms of collaboration suites, there's a number of them that are out there. My recommendation is when you're looking at any type of collaboration, we'll run through a couple types, choose an ecosystem. So if you're using Microsoft, stick to Microsoft products. You'll be able to better contain the data and control the data, or Google if you're using that, whatever you're currently on, but just pick a lane line. Try not to overlap many times because you'll end up with data in different silos that you may forget about or forget to remove access for an employee if they leave. So then you have data leaking out of the organization. And pick a lane line and broadcast it out to your staff. Otherwise, you'll end up with things known as shadow IT, where your employees will take these into their own hands and just start using something. So in terms of interoffice, Slack, Teams, GChat are all available. Most Microsoft solutions include Teams. So if you have questions on that, feel free to reach out to your account rep or to your IT provider. You might already be paying for these things. In terms of remote meetings, David's going to touch on the security of these, but there's many platforms that are out there. Zoom, Teams, FaceTime, Android. Zoom works well because it's an easy technology to use. Teams is also very good for remote connectivity, but again, pick one for your enterprise and go forward, as well as document collaboration. Office 365 has a very tightly knit ecosystem for files, things like being able to use Teams and put a document in a Teams group, and then real-time collaborate on that, and keep that in one spot, as opposed to having to email a document back and forth and have change control issues. Google's ecosystem does the same type of thing through Google Drive, Docs, and Sheets. Task management. So there's a number of different task management softwares that are out there. Asana, Trello, Microsoft Planner, Microsoft Project. Microsoft Planner is also included with most of the business-oriented Office 365 SKUs, which Microsoft is changing to the name Microsoft 365. Timing could have been a little bit better, maybe push it off, but you'll see some of that coming out soon. The Microsoft Planner product is a way to visually organize tasks as well as status of those tasks and who is responsible for them. And all these do a good job of that. But again, if you're going to use a Microsoft ecosystem, Planner works really well. You can assign different task categories like to do, on track, at risk, in progress, completed. And when you do your team huddles, you can use this board to visually represent the tasks that are out there, to organize them so they're all in one spot and everyone can look at it all at the same time. So when you're working on something, you're keeping this updated. Another thing to look at while managing remote teams and working remotely is workflow management. So this is not just about signing of documents. The three platforms that I'm talking about here, Adobe Acrobat, HelloSign, DocuSign, there's lots of them that are out there, will help you electronically sign documents so that you're not having to mail documents back and forth or having to deal with change control on documents themselves. They're all in one spot, which is important. But a lot of these now are incorporating workflow management. So it's, okay, once this is signed, who then gets the document next? Who has to receive an email in AP so they know they have to process this request? Who now has to do an onboarding for a customer and kick off an internal onboarding meeting because a new contract has been signed? Or who has to order licensing because this new quote was completed? So it's more than just signing of documents. It's how do you take that organizational or tribal knowledge maybe, or even if it's documented, and automate it, so that this is all in one ecosystem. So this part will segue a little bit into where David's talking about security, and some of these lines blur. But one of the things I'm passionate about is email tracking. And I like to say that your new perimeter for your organization many times becomes email itself. So when you're working from home, your staff are everywhere. They're working at their home internet, their home Wi-Fi, maybe they're on an airplane, or maybe they're in a hotel room. They're not protected by potentially the corporate firewall unless you have a more advanced solution. And so email is a way to directly get at your staff. And so phishing has become common, spear phishing, but also this concept of email trackers. And if you're in a regulated industry, especially in law, it's one of those things that the governing organization about ethics, the ARDC, says is now not allowed. So what is email tracking? So many times Outlook or Gmail will hide images in emails. There's a security reason for that. And that's that using those emails, pictures when they launch, can reveal information about the sender, or sorry, about the recipient, about their computer, where they might exist physically on the planet, their address, as well as some other identifying items. So initially it was just used for phishing, but it slowly has grown over time, and you can see this graph. Over 70% of emails that are sent out today have trackers in them. And CrowdStrike, who's a security firm, indicates that this is kind of the initial foothold that they use for ransomware. So it might not be something you're considering as important, but this is one of the first steps hackers will often use to surveil your staff as basically a recon to a hack. So this is what an email tracker actually looks like. And this might be just to gain insight and information and why attorneys are no longer allowed to use this. An attorney sends an email to a individual threatening litigation with a tracker built in. That individual reads the email, and that person who sent the email gets notified that that the person received it, and then they get a bunch of information about that individual, like their physical location, how many times they've opened it, and some information about their PC. That person then forwards it off to 4 other people at another company. They forward it off to an attorney, they forward it to an insurance carrier, and the original attorney can actually still see all that activity. They can see that it was opened by an insurance company. They could see that it was opened by a law firm. They could see that it was opened by other people in other companies. And so it gives you behavioral data to tell you that that message that was sent out might actually have caused a little bit of a firestorm. So it gives you insight into how the organization or individual is behaving based on that data. Also, everybody's working from home, or almost everybody's working from home. And this is an example of using an email tracker, how close this can get. And I happen to know where the individual lives, and it's within 2 city blocks. So depending on the tools that you're using, they can be pretty accurate in terms of revealing where your remote workforce's staff might be residing. And as well as this yellow box, you know, you're asking your staff to work remotely. Everybody would love their staff to continue to work faster, but as you work faster, the organization might be susceptible to other issues, like being phished. So it's important to help those employees through education, but also through a proactive technology to tell them data about the email they're receiving, that it might be a potential phishing attempt. And there's a number of products that if you have questions on later on, that can help assist in that. So that's wrapping up the business and then the security email side. I'm going to turn it over to David on the cybersecurity side.
Thanks, Brian. I'm Dave Rossell, and I run Ntiva's security and consulting practice. And I've been getting a lot of questions over the past few weeks about cybersecurity and what do we need to do differently now that we're in a work from home, sort of a mandatory work from home environment, or in this, you know, in this abnormal COVID work situation. And so what I'm going to talk about today is really focusing in on what do we need to do? What are some of the risks that we're seeing now? What are potential solutions to those risks? And then to touch on just a couple of things that I couldn't make fit anyplace else in the outline where it made sense. Let me see if I can advance the slide. Excellent. So to start, to orient you to where we are right now, you know, the big question is, how are we at risk now more than we were before? And, you know, what are the increased dangers? And really, I have good news for you. You know, the risks out there, the vulnerabilities, the methods of attack are all the same now as they were 6 months ago. You know, attackers are still using phishing. We're still worrying about credential compromise on through phishing messages. Now, hold on, I see my my video is running. My video is not on. Let me fix that. So you should be able to see me now in my work from home environment. Great. So a lot of the same types of things that were around before: phishing, credential compromise, ransomware, data mining, malware, all of that stuff is the same as in the pre-COVID world. Now, and the solutions, the ways to address those issues also haven't changed. So you've still got to know where your data is located. Multi-factor authentication is still the gold standard for helping to secure your organization. An educated workforce, and some form of advanced endpoint protection. So all of this is great. You know, state of the art is state of the art pre-COVID and post-COVID. The not so great news is that phishing attacks are off the charts right now. Attackers know that fear, anxiety, unfamiliar environments reduce people's vigilance and critical thinking. You know, anxiety especially biologically disrupts the decision-making parts of the brain, making it harder to make good choices. And this is going to be especially relevant for your office workers when they're evaluating whether to click on some links and some phishing messages. People's anxiety levels being high also means that they're a lot more likely to respond to emotional triggers in messages that they otherwise might not have responded to. So those are two areas where we need to really try to help boost individual resilience, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. And okay, great. So let's first talk about understanding your risks. And I apologize, there's a substantial delay between when I click on a button and when the slides advance. Okay, so let's talk about really drill down and talk about risks. To start talking about credential compromise, you know, I discussed briefly earlier that your users are more at risk than ever before to phishing attacks, which provides an increased opportunity for attackers to steal credentials. And in this remote work world right now, there are a lot of instances where remote access was rolled out pretty quickly and maybe not secured as thoroughly as it should. So we've got cases there where there's greatest susceptibility to those stolen credentials being exploited in ways that they wouldn't have been if an IT team was rolling stuff out in a more graceful way. Because of the increase in phishing attacks, we're also seeing an increase in risk to data mining, malware, and ransomware. Now, on the one hand, users are going to be more susceptible to these attacks, but on the other hand, these attacks are going to have a much harder time moving laterally across a network because these computers are not all connected to one another on a local area network because we're all working remote. So plus side is easier to infect, but plus side is you know, hard to transmit. Negative is that it's perhaps easier to infect. So next slide, we're going to talk also a little bit right now about video conferencing. And let's see, it's not advancing. There we go. Video conferencing risks. So we've heard a lot in the news lately about whether, you know, can I trust Zoom or any of these other standard providers out there? There's a lot of jargon being tossed around with encryption, you know, AES 128 versus AES 256. Why should you care? What does it all mean? Who do you trust? So to get at, can you trust Zoom? And my answer to that is going to be a qualified yes. You know, if you are a member of the Defense Industrial Base. If you are working for the federal government, I would think twice about using Zoom. If you're in general, if you're in any industry that a state-sponsored actor might be interested in attacking, then you need to have some concerns about Zoom. For most of the rest of us, you really don't need to worry about it. It's a pretty steep investment for an attacker to try to intercept a data stream as it's going across the internet, and then encrypt it, even if that encryption has flaws. So what's the best answer for video conferencing for your business? Almost certainly it is just keep doing what you're doing. It's what your people are used to. And there's less risk associated with that overall, taking overall risk into account. All right, I think we should be advancing to the next slide shortly. I'm going to move on now to start talking about solutions. Okay, first and foremost, you need to understand your data. That is, you can't protect data if you don't know where it lives. And if you're working in a corporate environment where everybody's in the same office, it's sometimes easier to track data with everybody working on the same file servers and using the same standard business processes. When people have switched to this unusual work environment, people may be saving data in locations where they would not otherwise do so. And as a business, it's incumbent on you to provide your teams with really clear guidance on how they should be handling their data, where it should be stored, and the methods that they should be using to transmit that data. One of the most important ways that you're going to be able to safeguard your enterprise, either pre-COVID or post-COVID, is multi-factor authentication, also called MFA. There are three ways to prove identity nowadays. You can demonstrate who you are by presenting something that you know, like a password. You can present something that you have, like a token or a key card, or you can present proof of what you are, who you are, and that would be something that's biometric, like a fingerprint or an iris scan or a face scan from a facial recognition system. Multi-factor authentication requires two factors to be able to prove identity. So we're used to passwords being a default single factor. And what this is saying is, well, it's fairly easy to guess a password, but it's a lot harder to both guess a password and obtain the physical object that somebody was using to prove their identity. So in most cases, to secure remote access to a solution, we want to have somebody both presenting a password and using a multi-factor authentication system like Duo or Microsoft Authenticator. Those solutions are not unhackable. That is, there are ways to circumvent multi-factor authentication, but those methods require some ability to get at the end user's computer, or they require a degree of control over the telecommunications system or internet. So for most purposes, multi-factor authentication is going to be good enough to secure remote access. I know a lot of organizations may feel like they don't want to roll out a new technical solution at a time where there's a lot of uncertainty and where you have to support a remote workforce, but you really can't delay any longer. If you don't use multi-factor now, you really should have been in the first place. And it's critical to close up this really significant gap in your cybersecurity because it really is just a matter of time before an attacker is able to gain access to your email or to your VPN unless you have MFA in place. An educated workforce is also a critical component. You know, we've talked already about phishing attacks are on the rise and that they're going to be more successful in this anxiety-filled world. Phishing prevention training is a great solution to this. It doesn't necessarily prevent phish from occurring from a technical perspective, but it goes one better in that it helps and create an informed workforce that is going to be a lot more resilient to phishing attacks, regardless of the type of attack that's occurring. We usually recommend that organizations do a simulated phish once a month to help ensure that their users are getting enough exposure to phishes to get some good practice. And these solutions are really inexpensive. There are free versions out there on the internet, and even the premium versions, like what we use, are just a couple of dollars per user per month. And you get good metrics from that. You're able to follow up with people who seem especially susceptible. And it can really transform organizations from having, 30%, 40% or more of their users click on phishing messages down to around 10%. It can really make a difference. And here this is about, helping reduce the cognitive load on people, helping them make better decisions by giving them training that makes it easier for them to see these things coming. And then finally, I want to touch on advanced endpoint protection, EDR. Maybe 2-3 years ago, this was something that was part of just elite cybersecurity for a handful of organizations. In the modern ransomware environment, it is essential for every organization to have some sort of advanced endpoint protection. I attended a seminar that the FBI put on back in the fall, and one of the very first agents that spoke said was, conventional antivirus is not enough anymore. They're talking about types of attacks that circumvent conventional antivirus by constantly changing. Your garden variety antivirus software that we've always relied on in the past looks at essentially fingerprints of malware, and it keeps a database of these malware fingerprints, and it compares the software on your computer to these fingerprints, and it throws an alert if a fingerprint matches. Attackers are getting more and more savvy, and what they're doing is they're making tiny changes to their attacking software such that it no longer matches those fingerprints, and that means that it slips through conventional antivirus. Advanced endpoint protection, or sometimes called EDR, endpoint detection and response, doesn't look just at fingerprints. It looks at the behavior of the software and the behavior of the users on your computers, and it generates alerts based on behaviors that are consistent with a bad actor or consistent with somebody trying to do evil on your computer. And it's much, much more effective. These software solutions can be just a little more expensive than conventional antivirus, but the value that you get far outweighs the additional cost. And so finally, I want to leave you with some parting thoughts. Great. First of them is regarding anxiety. You want to reduce anxiety for your workforce right now. And my message to you is it's not just a nice thing to do. It's going to help your cybersecurity. If you reduce anxiety overall, if you enhance communication among your workforce, if you re-emphasize your standard business practices and reassure people that it's okay to communicate and that it's okay to chat with each other if they have any questions at all, that's going to improve your overall cybersecurity posture. and make a real difference in your organization, uh, getting through COVID-19 in a stronger position than it was from a security perspective than it was going in. One of the things that I'm doing is I'm keeping a notebook on what's working well for us operationally, and especially from a security perspective, and what isn't working so well. And I'm going to take that data and I'm going to roll it into our business continuity planning for when we're doing our business continuity exercises next year. And then finally, you know, a lot of us in the security space and in IT have a tendency to try to secure systems by saying no. You know, no, you can't do that. No, you can't use the solution. And that's not going to be a helpful response in this COVID work from home environment. We've got to help our teams provide users with solutions and to reach out proactively and ask people what they're trying to accomplish, what they're trying to do, and then in turn provide them with secure ways of doing this, ways that we can maintain going forward, and ways where we know where the data lives. So finally, let me talk just a little bit about business continuity planning. You know, I touched on this a little bit in terms of keeping a war diary, so to speak. You know, you want to, if you don't already, create a business continuity team and work on a business continuity plan. The team should meet quarterly and sort of discuss, you know, how things are going. Some organizations will use weather emergencies as ways to conduct business continuity exercises in advance of a real crisis happening. And the goal here is you want to make sure that the toolkits that you're relying on all work properly. You know, this isn't so much a case of servers crashing. This is which is more of a DR situation or disaster recovery situation. This is you determining and ensuring really, hey, are the methods that we use to ensure that our businesses can continue to operate, are those methods viable and valid in a case where people can't physically get into the office, or in a case where, you know, interpersonal communication is restricted to web conferencing and phone calls for a period of weeks. Your group of people that's assessing business continuity and working on it shouldn't just be IT. You know, you need your operations people on it. You need stakeholders from all of your various departments, and you need some sort of senior leader or sponsor, such as a COO or a managing partner, to really get behind this effort, because executive level buy-in is one of the key components really to any good business continuity planning exercise or activity. And above all, remember that, you know, business continuity planning is not a one and done exercise. You're going to have to revisit this just like you revisit any key aspect of cybersecurity. Brian, back to you.
Thank you, David. So just like COVID-19 going on right now, many people don't think that their servers are going to crash. Many people think that they're not going to be affected by external events, but I think it's important to remember that these things do happen, especially here in the Chicago region. I called out a couple of them that are important, that actually did affect business in unique ways. The Chicago River flood is probably the most interesting, as well as very recent. The tunnels below the city of Chicago, specifically the downtown area, flooded. The river started entering the basements of all the buildings, and there were concerns about physical stability of those buildings, and people just couldn't go into their offices. And in '92, that was almost inconceivable. People had lots of paper. Remote access wasn't really a thing. So these types of events are going to continue to occur, and we should be planning for them. 9/11, significantly curtailed business travel and travel in general. Great Chicago Fire, most of downtown burned. So making sure that you have backup copies. So I don't know what the next pandemic or next business impacting event is going to be, but we should be prepared for many different ways to work. And that's why I believe not just work from home, but work from anywhere. If you're unable to get to your office and to your house, how do you continue to operate your business? So likely your next disaster will not be a pandemic, but it will probably cause harm to your community and to how your company operates. As David indicated, I think the diary that you build is going to be important. We're all testing our DR and BCPs, our disaster recovery business continuity plans. And we're stress testing them very well. Some of those things are probably going great. Some of those things will need improvement. So informing your DR BCP is an important part of the process. That's why we do it a couple times a quarter or a couple times a year or once a quarter to make sure that the environment that we are in and the plans that we have continue to be updated. So how can we set ourselves up for faster recovery during this as well as next time? So your remote collaboration can and should continue. Implementing productivity metrics. And this is not just about tracking time. And many firms are good at tracking actual time used or time billed, but it's more than that. You should set your collaboration goals with your team. Doing a morning huddle in video with your team, your direct reports to kick off to say hello, but also to have some goals set. Hey, everybody, this is what we're going to be working on today as a team. Individually, what are the things that you're going to be working on, to do a little bit more of a check-in, and you could use things like Microsoft Planner to plan those out, as well as reoccurring one-on-one check-ins. Out of sight is not out of mind, and those drop-ins that you often had in the past where you'd wander by somebody's office and have a collaboration moment don't exist as they would before. You could always do a drop-in video call, but it's nice to have some of those planned out. And continuing to upgrade your business continuity plan team to lessen the impact on senior management. So the more that gets planned out beforehand, the more it's tested, the less that rolls back uphill. And also, what else could it solve for? David and I have had some great conversations about this. Your business continuity team is not just about your COVID-19 response. It also is the same team, especially for smaller companies, that can work on your security, as well as your DR, your disaster recovery. So use it as a technology-focused team, a business continuity team, a security team. If you're under 50 employees, you're probably not going to have the bandwidth to create all these separate teams with different individuals. Create a team to champion that response, and it'll continue to pay dividends down the road. Also think about KPIs. So there are different KPIs that you could be using for work from home. It's not just about hours sitting in front of the PC, but it's what's the output that's created. And there are some unique tools that can be used too to track productive time versus just clocked in. So companies are exploring those. We've rolled that out for a few clients to not only show the amount of time the employee is logged in to work, but also the amount of time the employee is logged in to work while they are active, to be able to show high-level metrics. We talked about testing your VPN. That's important. Testing your internet, not only at your home, but also at your workplace. Something you should be doing often. But also, David mentioned phishing your team. It's very important. And I think from the business side, a reason too that phishing is important is those employees are leaking information out to the public. There's a top 10 law firm here in Chicago that's got an interesting take on phishing and how it applies to business risk. They, for non-billable staff, have instituted a policy that if you get phished once, you lose 50% of your bonus for the year. If you get phished twice, you lose 100% of your bonus and you're likely ineligible for a raise. And if you get phished 3 times, you get fired. And that might be extremely shocking to everybody to hear, but you think about what getting phished means. That means a a malicious third party has sent a note to one of your employees and they have leaked some information out. Maybe it wasn't a lot, maybe it was a lot, but in reality, what you're saying is if you're doing your phishing testing and you find people, you have identified a business risk. And so I think it's important for the business side to look at it as an HR question of how productive is this employee? What are they bringing to the table? And does the benefit outweigh the risk? And so it's a different way to think about security and business together. But I think it's going to be something we're going to see a lot going forward. Also stocking up. As I mentioned before, webcams throughout the world are basically sold out. You go on Amazon and it's either third-party suppliers that are selling them at 10 times regular price, or it's brands that are non-traditional. Logitech is basically unavailable anywhere. So things you should stock up on are toolkits for your employees. I'm a huge proponent of everybody converting to laptops. It's really easy because you need to work from home or you need to work somewhere else. You undock and leave, and all your stuff's there. You don't need to reset it up on your home computer. It's all ready to go. Also, most laptops, as I'm presenting myself right here, have a webcam built in. So it's one less thing to purchase as well as to bring around. Also thinking about all company communication systems. How do you get in touch with all your staff or your employees before something happens? And remote access licensing. A lot of things that have come over the transom on the service desk side have been, I've ran out of how many concurrent people can connect to my remote workplace. I need to buy more. The time to do that is during your DR drills when everybody is saturating the utilization. Everyone's trying to do it at once as if you actually needed to do it. I would not wait to do those at the time of the emergency. That could take potentially days to procure as these companies selling the licenses are unable to meet demand in terms of response time. And last is stock up on janitorial as well as safety supplies, PP&E. And if you don't necessarily need them and you're all working from home, be a hero and donate them. And the last slide here is a little bit of a thought experiment, and then we can roll into Q&A. So what did you learn about the future of your organization or your industry? Work from home as well as this shelter-in-place order has really changed the way that businesses should be looking at how they service their customers as well as how they operate. What would happen if work from home lasted forever? If you had to shelter in place for the foreseeable future? This could be the very tip of that iceberg. Another question and thing to think about is, can you arbitrage your real estate costs for technology investment? And I encourage you to think about that as a yes. I think it's very possible for you to spend less on physical real estate, spend more on cybersecurity, spend more on work from anywhere products to enable your technology to fuel your capabilities, your workforce. Again, not just for work from home, but work from anywhere. And back to that DR diary or that BCP diary, what failed? And what actually worked better than you expected? And what do you wish you had automated prior? A lot of companies I've talked to are fortunately redlined in the food service space, for instance. So where could you apply things like software development to build and automate workflow processes that are manual so that they can scale infinitely or significantly further without having to hire additional staff or build out new workflows? And what do your customers think? I think it's a good thing to talk to your customers about how they're experiencing your services provided. It's also a great avenue to understand how you can improve. And from an IT perspective, was it business as usual or close to it? Or was it not so great? And honestly, was it luck or was it preparedness? And I think it's important to be honest with yourself and to use those outcomes to discuss in your business continuity planning meetings. And what do you currently spend on IT? I think what everybody's learning is everybody's a tech company now. There's no such thing as a tech-enabled company. Everybody that's working right now is an IT company to some extent. And you should be investing in the technology as such, because everybody working from home is riding some level or percentage of technology rails. So I appreciate everybody joining us today. Thank you, David, and thank you, Holly. And we'll turn it over to some questions. Holly, if you could help kick off
Sure.
some of the questions that the people have asked.
Thanks, Brian. We have a couple minutes left. I'm pulling 3 questions from the chat here. And the first one, I believe, is a security question. So David, we'll aim that at you. I can't afford a bunch of new IT initiatives right now. So what's the single most important thing I can do?
I mean, my knee-jerk reaction is, of course, all of them are critical, but and you would actually really be surprised at how inexpensive some of these things are. You know, for example, you can get advanced endpoint protection for, you know, $5, $6 per endpoint per month, and that would allow you to get great protection for all of your computers for people who are working remote and your servers. If somebody held a gun to my head and said, I can only pick one, I would pick multi-factor authentication. It's the single most critical thing that you can do to prevent data theft from your organization.
Okay, thanks.
It's probably the cheapest.
And it's free in a lot of cases. You know, Microsoft Authenticator, which is included free in Office 365, can be used to secure that. Google Authenticator can do the same thing with G Suite. You know, if you've got a bunch of different applications, then it makes sense to invest in a for-fee product like Duo. You know, if you have a VPN connection that you need to secure, then you might look at something like Duo, where you're using Duo to secure VPN as well as Office 365 and other applications.
So David, while you were explaining that, a follow-on question came in the chat. If I have MFA, a VPN, and EDR in place, and my password is phished, how could a hacker get into my network?
The answer is that depends a little bit on your infrastructure. If you've got MFA safeguarding, say, Office 365, as well as your VPN connection, if your password is phished, you should be good, because EDR also will alert you to an attacker doing something on your computer that could allow that attacker to circumvent MFA. So MFA and EDR is really a very strong combination of security measures to deal with modern threats. And that's actually the baseline that I recommend for our clients.
Okay. Last question here, and Brian, I think this is aimed at you. We were talking earlier about bandwidth for internet in our home office, and it's literally, how much bandwidth do I really need for my home office when I'm doing things like VoIP and Zoom, etc.?
So you could look at this from a number of different perspectives. One, I'd say, is how many people are in the house. So for myself, my wife and I are sheltering in place here in Chicago. She's often on some level of video conferencing as well as I concurrently. Video conference really doesn't take a lot of bandwidth relatively. I think one of the biggest things that people will see as a consumption would be 4K Netflix. So as a benchmark, 4K Netflix is 25 megabits per second, which is going to be more video than a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting. So as a good benchmark, I'd say at least 50 megabits would be great. But you need to look at both upload and download, because most consumer or business grade internet connections are what they call asynchronous. So your upload speed, or how much bandwidth you have to be able to upload your video or to send your picture out or your voice out, is typically significantly curtailed. So you want to make sure that I'd say at least 10 megabits on the upside would be enough to breathe if you had multiple people. If you've got more than two, let's say you got kids and they're also playing on Netflix and doing other things, then I would continue to increase that number. I'd say most homes have at least 100 or on up from there.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, folks, we've reached the top of the hour, noon, so we're going to have to end this. You can see on the screen in front of you the contact information for both Brian and David. If you have any follow-on questions, feel free to email them. And like I mentioned, I'll be sending this recording out hopefully tomorrow, if not a Friday at the latest. And thank you very much for attending, and we'll be in touch with all of you soon.
Very good.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.